Joining us now in studio to talk more about this very heavy information is Daniel Sheck, former Israeli ambassador to France and the director of diplomacy for the Hostage and Missing Families Forum. Also in studio is Dan Perry, author of Ask Questions Later and former Europe and Middle East editor of the Associated Press.
The only deal that's actually on the table is a pullout from Gaza, leaving Hamas, weakened, but still in power in exchange for all the hostages. That has been a Hamas demand since early on in the war, and it hasn't moved a centimeter. Israel is the side that keeps on changing its position and reneging on its own offers, and the reason why it's behaving this way is a complex matter, and there's a lot of speculation about the political side of it, but there's a legitimate side to it as well, beyond Netanyahu's desire to cling to power. There's a legitimate issue, which is that leaving Hamas in power in Gaza is highly unpalatable to the majority of the Israeli public. So it's very easy to say, everyone wants to return the hostages. Sure, everyone wants world peace, but not at any price. If the price were to, dismantle the state of Israel, that would not receive majority support.
That is not on the table. So let's keep this discussion.
What's on the table?
Let's keep this discussion in the framework of what is really on the table, not the dismantlement of the state of Israel.
What's on the table is leaving Hamas in power in Gaza.
Yeah.
Probably is time to end the war in exchange for all the hostages and pull out of Gaza and leave Hamas in power. And I say that without in any way belittling the agony of that outcome for Israel. Mm-hmm. It is because Israel itself has engineered this outcome by refusing to discuss an alternative to Hamas. If Hamas remains in power in Gaza, it is because Netanyahu and his clueless government have impeded all efforts to create a day-after scenario where there is an alternative to Hamas in Gaza. Therefore, the idea that Israel must continue the war until Hamas is gone runs counter to its own war strategy. The war strategy appears to be to create an indefinite insurgency that lasts until the next election, the whole time Netanyahu claiming that you can't have political repercussions for October 7th because we're at war. Now this is a true horror. To think such things of one's political leadership is unpleasant. So people run away from what is emerging as the probable truth of what I just said.
So what about what the Prime Minister was saying? He was reiterating, obviously, when he did the speech in English, but saying to give up this whole Philadelphia corridor thing is going to make it worse, and it's going to make it worse for the hostages. Is there any truth to that, or is it just the way that he spins it?
Go ahead,
Daniel. Daniel first.
No, I think we're going to say the same thing.
Yeah. Philadelphia corridor has become the new holy. The new Temple Mount. Yes. Suddenly, 3 months ago, it emerged. It was not a top priority for 15 years of Netanyahu's government. It was not a top priority in 11 months of the war. If it's so important, so crucial, why didn't we go straight to the Philadelphia?
I can actually say that this is the Netanyahu propaganda style. To take a small bit of the picture that looks reasonable, inflate it out of all proportion. With a small bit
of truth.
With a grain of truth, more than a grain of truth. Inflate it out of all proportion, ignore the consequences of doing so, and if at all possible, add some kind of slogan. The Philadelphia corridor is indeed the border with Egypt. There has been smuggling of arms from Egypt.
That's why I'm wondering why this wasn't discussed for the past 5 years.
The smuggling happens in underground tunnels that begin deep in Egypt and end up deep in Gaza, not overland. The army doesn't want to occupy it because the soldiers are sitting ducks in a small corridor about 10 miles by a few hundred yards. They would be shot at all the time, and the smuggling will go on beneath them. Okay? It's a nice to have, but is this the reason why you sacrifice the hostages, have more soldiers killed, continue the war, continue the devastation to Israel's economy and international standing, risk a regional war with Hezbollah, continue to project indifference and disdain towards the possibility of a Western alliance with Israel and the Sunni Arab states, a raid against Iran? The costs of holding on to the Philadelphia corridor, which is highly debatable in its usefulness, are preposterously unequal. Now, When Israel launched the war, it didn't say that one of its goals was to keep any part of Gaza, including the Philadelphia corridor.
I honestly don't know. There is no rational explanation to this position, which was very thoroughly and precisely described just a minute ago. You know, the Herzi Halevi, the General Chief of Staff, head of the army, he more or less said in so many words, let's do this, let's pull out, we'll leave these systems that the Americans have proposed, maybe some foreign personnel, a lot of electronics in this, and if things go sour, it will take me 2 days to reoccupy it in the state that the decimated state of Hamas currently is. So, you know, again, it's not comfortable, it's not ideal, but it's part of the price for what happened on October 7th.
I think it would take them, I've heard some generals say it would take them 2 hours.
Yeah, maybe. Wow. Yeah,
I mean, it's a small area.
Yeah, it's 15 kilometers of nothing.
And there's no like buildings and
no, there's no cities.
Netanyahu's claim is that the world won't allow it. Think about that for a second. Think about that. The world does allow what's going on now. Yeah. And what happened to Mr. Security, who does what Israel needs for its security? He's going to wait for permission to reoccupy the Philadelphia corridor, which the army says they can do in 2 days. There is an explanation. There is an explanation. It's a horrifying explanation. But if you look at the seemingly inexplicable paradigm that you just described very accurately, there's a Latin phrase, qui bonum, who benefits? Yeah? Who benefits? There is a theory that is not a minority theory in Israel, that Netanyahu wants the war to go on because of the setup, the landscape he's engineered, where he says, let's not do an accounting for the debacle of October 7th until after the war. I support the deal, first phase and all 3 phases. What I'm saying is the ultimate end game of the war that is on the table, assuming
we don't know what the real end game will be.
Assuming all 3 phases of the deal of the proposal that Israel made are implemented, and I believe Biden assumes they will be implemented, is just that. His plan, I'm sure, was always to try to spark a third intifada in the West Bank, in addition to all the other fronts that they successfully helped create. This one has been rather unsuccessful because of determined Israeli action. We tend to forget about 600 Palestinians, mostly, I'm sure, Hamas and jihad activists, but not all, militants, have died in the West Bank since October 7th, have been killed in the West Bank by Israeli forces, and about 5,000 have been arrested. So there's a constant Sisyphean effort to prevent the West Bank from exploding in violence. And Iran, obviously, and as expected, is doing all it can to foment all this and fan flames and trying to smuggle weapons into the West Bank via Jordan. And if any of those weapons remain in Jordan, that could destabilize the kingdom as well. It's a very bad, very dangerous situation. And as for the U.S. Turkish citizen who was killed today, I hope Israel learns from past mistakes this way and really convincingly investigates. By the way, it wasn't just this person, also a 13-year-old girl was killed. I understand it's very difficult, but the impression of a light-tringer figure needs to be addressed.
All right, back with Daniel Sheck and Daniel Perry. So we're so used to obviously talking about the Middle East, but here we are. We got to remember that Trump is in the game trying to get the Jewish vote. And what do you think of what he said? I mean, some pretty typical Trump quips.
Well, as I said while we were listening, typical nuanced Donald Trump, Israel will cease to exist. Well, luckily the rest of the world might survive, but who knows, maybe it's the end of the world altogether. So yes, but I mean, he's fighting an uphill battle with the Jewish vote. He knows that. He's always very frustrated by what he considers disloyalty of the Jewish community towards the president who did the most for Israel, etc., etc. Will it change? I don't know. We have somebody with an American accent here who might want to comment on
this. And a vote in Pennsylvania, yes, which is critical.
Oh,
and where the Jewish vote is
critical. And that's, yeah, exactly.
Look,
what percentage of Pennsylvania, I mean, obviously it's going to come down to that. What is the Jewish population in Pennsylvania?
Several 100,000 for sure. Okay. I mean, the election was pretty much called after the votes came in from Philadelphia County and the Philadelphia suburbs, which is where I vote. So I kind of feel like
And even Netanyahu lived in the Philadelphia suburbs.
Yeah, and so our personal histories are very similar, actually. Look, Trump lacks nuance. I'm not sure Israel will vanish because Harris gets elected. But on this occasion, I think he exhibited a lesser degree of nonsense than we are accustomed to. Because it is actually true that of the two sides in American politics, automatic support for Israel is more prevalent on the right. I think Harris is a classic Democrat, liberal, not a progressive, not really. And she probably is, to a great degree, a continuity candidate from Biden. She'll support Israel. But for sure, there are elements in a Democratic coalition that are anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic, and that's just a fact. So it is interesting that the Jews vote for the Democrats to the tune of about 75 to 80%, and Trump is obviously frustrated. And the landscape I described will probably lead to some attrition of the Jewish vote in the direction of Trump, for sure. I don't trust Trump to actually do what's needed on Iran. Trump is the opposite of the famous saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. He speaks loudly and carries no stick. And of course, the Democrats have shown some weakness in dealing with Iran and its coalition. They, for God's sake, can't even take out the Houthis as they impede a third of global maritime trade. I would rather want to see a third way, where the West and NATO and the U.S. administration go to Iran and basically lay down a law and say no more nuclear program, no more support for terrorist proxies in Lebanon and Yemen and the Gaza and West Bank, but also Shiite militias and destabilizing Iraq. The skullduggery that Iran is up to is outrageous, and they're about to gain nuclear weapons, at which point it will be very difficult to restrain them. And I think they need to be told very clearly, all this must end immediately, or we will bomb your ports, blockade your ports, bomb your oil installations, do bunker busting bombs on your nuclear facilities, bomb your TV stations and your government installations, and foment revolt. And that would be a risky policy for sure, and they try to strike at Israel. But if the world doesn't clearly tell them that we're about to get serious about the mania that you're spreading around the planet, and in particular the nuclear program, then you will pay a very heavy price. And my guess is they'll back down. They'll back down.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens with that. Thank you, Daniel and Dan. Very interesting discussion tonight. Have a nice weekend.